Hello, everyone on YouTube. Today, we're here for one last debrief on Chiang Mai SEO, and specifically to talk about AI, GEO, and optimization for LLMs, ChatGPT, Perplexity, you know them, with the recent release of Gemini, which is interesting, especially interesting since it was a very, very big topic during this Chiang Mai SEO. So I'm going to try to talk to you about it, a bit of everything that was said, all the important things to remember, everything I personally learned, all the techniques I tested in the meantime, all the things I plan to test in the coming months. And I'll give you a bit of context each time so you can see to what extent all of this was discussed and how much you should actually believe them, quite simply. Quite simply, the first thing is yes, indeed, there is a huge overlap between SEO and GEO and optimization for AIs for each GPT. SEO and AI optimization overall, brands that perform very well in SEO are generally brands that also perform very well in GEO. And there are many techniques that end up being similar. There are a lot of things that have been explained like this, but I'll try to give you all the most interesting parts and those that really stand out. For your information, my name is Leo Poitvin, and I run an SEO agency called Astrak Agency. If you ever want to work with us, whether it's for optimization directly for AI, GEO, ChatGPT, or generative engines, don't hesitate. If it's for traditional SEO, we're also available, of course. I'll leave you a way to contact me directly in the description. If you're interested, just click and book an appointment. Otherwise, I'll leave you directly with the video. So the most interesting things are kind of in this part. Here you go. AI engines, what's the difference and why are there differences compared to Google? So here I'm going to give you quite a few things that are pretty interesting. One of the first points is that Google potentially reads the authors. LLMs don't care about the author, or at least very little. There was a comparison done by Surfer. I think it was Surfer. SEO on the factors that were influential depending on the AI. So they took 5 AIs. They took AI Mode, Overview, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, Gemini, I think. That makes 6, but anyway, I can't remember exactly which ones they were. And each time they compared the different things a bit. So you see, we know that, for example, Google reads the authors. And in particular, if the authors are very important people, it tends to be a bit overvalued by Google. In my opinion, personally, it's related to named entities. And if your author is in the knowledge graph, they tend to be valued. What happens next is that with respect to Google as well, we're going to have something called the crawl budget. Do you know what the crawl budget is? It's the budget that Google allocates to us for the time it will spend crawling and visiting our site. Here, what we have with AIs is something slightly different. It's the informational retrieval cost, meaning the cost of finding information. Basically, when we give a huge block of text to the AI, if we give it a text of 1,000,000 words in which it has to find a piece of information, it's really like finding a needle in a haystack. It will manage to do it, but it will be costly. The goal is to reduce this cost as much as possible so that the AI can process the information as efficiently as possible. It's somewhat similar to comparing the cost of retrieving information in AIs to the crawl budget at Google. Theoretically, there is a cost for crawling and retrieving information in AIs. In my opinion, while AIs are massively collecting data. So as a result, basically everyone has a lot more pages than, in fact, AIs are going to overinvest. So we won't have any issues with limits, unlike what we sometimes experience with Google and the crawl budget. But basically what's happening is that while AIs are around, they're processing an enormous amount. If things keep going this way, soon they'll have budget issues too, and they'll crawl less, process less, and so we'll have fewer things like that. So we need to wake up now and simply make it easier for AIs to find information in our content. There's something regarding, so that was just a quick note about AI mode. So AI mode in this case is a tab in Google directly. So it's a tab in Google search that lets us go straight into Gemini mode with all the AI features. And so what he was saying is that there are a lot of AIs, especially AI mode and others, which will write in a certain way, or for influencers, the best is to write in a straightforward manner. No fluff, no style, that's it. We're going for something that's very, very direct, very, very informational, very, very informative. Personally, I think that Google has the same perception about this, and basically writing straight to the point without style is something positive for Google, for semantics, and actually for having writing that is very easy to read and avoids redundancies and making Google's understanding more complicated. And here, in any case, it was confirmed for the AI part. behind something that some people were saying is the fact of writing in white on white. That still works for AIs. By the way, that's something I have personally, I haven't tested it myself, but I think that actually when it's written in white on white, it also works for Google, honestly. I think there's a slight difference. Actually, there's the question of the HTML DOM. So there you go. What's in your HTML and what's there for the users? Quite simply, writing in white on white works, but back when people did it for Google, it was because they were keyword stuffing, which that doesn't work anymore. So in fact, using a technique that still works for something that no longer works, it's not interesting. What we need now are texts that are rich and interesting for users, even if it means doing something like that. Why write in white on white? It doesn't make sense anymore. I think writing in white on white isn't really about that. Whether it works or not, it's just that it applies to the semantic lever, both for AIs and for Google. So it's quite relevant. It's pretty funny to see. And now potentially we all use accordions when there are issues with regard to the text and user interaction. For example, there are AIs where the quality of the author, so the credibility of the author, the EAT aspect, as it's sometimes called, whether they're in the knowledge graph, whether they're someone well known, is not at all something that's important. There are other AIs for which it was much more important. I remember that for GTPT, it's not important. And there's another one, I think it's AI mode, for which it is important. So, for example, only for AI mode is the author's credibility important. For the others, it's not. So there's really a question here. When you're doing SEO, you can't do SEO for just one algorithm. Doing SEO means knowing a bit about all the algorithms. That's where it gets extremely complicated because they all work very differently. There's someone, a Frenchman in particular, Alan Cladix, thanks to him for this, who said that LLMs really love formats. JSON. If you give them JSON format, they'll dive right into it. He even said, as an anecdote, that JSON is like cocaine for LLMs and AI. Don't hesitate to give them some. They love it. Overall, we can see that there are similarities and differences. With all this, there are new concepts emerging. The informational watchable cost is something that's very, very similar to the crawl budget in the end, but it's quite interesting because here it comes more into play in the written part. And there are aspects that are a bit more similar between the two. So we can see that there are still major similarities between SEO and Go, but there are also things coming that are a bit different, which we need to prepare for. There are always little techniques, of course, that can be a bit tricky and allow us to get around this. For example, this thing with JSON, which potentially allows you to influence AIs. By the way, it's worth noting that JSON, FAQ, people often talk about FAQs, structuring data into small questions and small answers. It works very well. In JSON, so JSON, FAQ, small questions, small answers, most certainly a good strategy to adopt for structuring content. Behind this, there was a whole section where, in fact, what we say about on-site, about geo, what we say about on-site, about content production, for AIs is that you have to be as direct and as simple as possible. Quite simply, as I was saying about crawl budget and information cost, I'm going to have to find a new way to say that to avoid switching to English every time, but quite simply, what is difficult for AIs is finding the information, being sure that it's here, being sure that it's present, and avoiding spending too much time sifting through information because every token costs them money. And so the faster they can get the information in the simplest way and without doubting it, with the most confidence possible, the better it is. Quite simply, as I was saying, the cost of retrieving information is kind of the new crawl budget. It's the cost they will have to pay, so they need to be careful about that. Everyone has said it. The goal is to write to the point, to write something that is very direct and very easy to understand. Here, we're going to revisit all the concepts from Corel Tugbird regarding semantics, which are very interesting and are regularly emphasized by my friends Paul Grease and Amori, who both manage semantic tools, Tote, SEO, and Certmantics. And the goal is going to be to write to the point, so to use short sentences. Active voice, we avoid adverbs. That's it. We keep it simple. We keep it direct. We avoid heavy copywriting. We avoid things that are too emotional. We're here to provide information. We remove all parts without information. Anything that's bold, anything that's redundant, etc. We cut, we cut, we cut. And here you'll see that the content we tend to produce for Google often isn't of very good quality. It's not very simple. Things we see regularly are, if we have extremely varied headings, that's quite positive. And concise content. So this ties back a bit to the concept I mentioned earlier, which is the FAQ concept, kind of like FAQ content. Content with a title, a subtitle, basically a title that's a question, and then a quick and dynamic answer that's provided very quickly. And this overall allows you to have something that theoretically performs well in LLMs. It's kind of the how to produce content for ChatGPT. That's it. That's what they'll tell you. Most people, even though there are very few frameworks that are truly perfect, and overall ChatGPT understands very well what you produce for it. But if you really want the optimal technique, normally this is the one you should use. After that, we'll have other interesting things. This was a concept I found particularly interesting, which was the concept of top sources, source tier 1 versus tier 2 sources, sources that are mixed or rehashed. When you make a request to ChatGPT, yeah, we're really going to focus on ChatGPT. No, actually, it was a test that was conducted on several AIs. What was done, I don't exactly remember who conducted the test. I think it was either Surfer or Alan. No, Surfer or someone like that. I think it was Surfer. Surfer here, okay? The biggest semantic tool in the world, at least as it stands, I suppose, honestly. By the way, Sylvain Perronnet recently in a LinkedIn post said that their statistical method for doing the calculations I'm about to show you was not viable and that it wasn't worth considering their statistical studies given that. Personally, I take it with a grain of salt. I understand that, yes, indeed, they're defending their own interests and tend to promote results that suit them. But still, I think it's interesting, even if it is. The statistical correlations aren't necessarily the best, so I believe they were using the Spear or Spearson correlation. But according to Sylvain, it wasn't viable. I don't have enough background in statistics to give you precise explanations. But anyway, take it with a grain of salt. However, I think it's still relevant when the biggest semantic tool is giving a talk at the biggest conference, SEO in the world. That's still pretty good information. So what they were saying is that there are two types of sources in HGPT and in AIs in general. So they were also talking about perplexity. It's about the sources. Tier one sources are when you make 100 calls to an AI. Each time it will produce 15 sources. 15 sources call 1, 15 sources call 2, 15 sources call 3. When we've made 100 calls, what are the 2 or 3 sources that come up every time? There are a few sources that will come up every time that are always the same, that appear once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. They come up very, very regularly. Their presence rate is much higher than average. There are about 10 sources after that. That's it. Which will lag behind, come and go. What does that mean? It means that ChatGPT is hard to influence because it will always draw from 2 or 3 sources. Who are these reliable sources? And it will mix that with 5 to 10 additional sources, which are somewhat less reliable sources. Here, this is where we see that Surfer SEO is preaching their own gospel, and they say that the most relevant, the most important factor to become a top source, a core source as they call them, a tier 1 source, is to have good semantic coverage on our source. So, well, obviously it comes down to doing SEO. It comes down to having good keywords properly placed. It comes down to covering our search intents, to having relevant semantics, something I quite agree with. I don't think it's the number one factor, but well, since I'm talking to them, that's pretty normal. To influence LLMs, what they tell you is that the most important thing is the sources, the core sources, because those are the only ones you can really rely on. He explains that if LLMs are volatile, if LLMs tend to cite different brands to vary, etc., it's essentially because the sources they use are volatile. That is to say, the information they go to look for, and again, in this whole section, I'm talking about LLMs that do web research, meaning when the LLM uses RAG, retrieval augmented generation, that is, when it searches on Google or generally on the internet, draws from sources and then uses those sources to retrieve information and then regurgitate it using its base knowledge. All this is to say that obviously, if you do a search on ChatGPT, which is not connected to the internet, everything we're talking about here is not relevant. So, LLMs, roughly speaking, ChatGPT tend to be highly volatile. Perplexity, for example, is much more stable. It tends to draw much more from the same sources. And so, because ChatGPT, for example, is highly volatile, the brands mentioned in ChatGPT also tend to experience significant volatility. Whereas as a result, we know that a source that ranks very well on Google is generally considered a tier 1 source. So the better a source ranks, the more likely it is to be selected by ChatGPT or the others. There are several actually. And this just shows a general correlation between SEO and GEO, where we know that all the sources that are very strong and perform well on Google also tend to rank well over there as well. Quite simply, the goal is to have sources that rank very highly on Google. A strategy that was often highlighted in this context was to say, well, let's select, and that's what a lot of link builders were there, a lot of backlink sellers. And so they all said, we're going to go after the best topics. There you go. We're going to secure your link and all that. We're going to secure your brand. That's why a lot of people sell insertions, mentions, and so on. I think it's possible to do that. And I think it's a very, very good strategy. It's definitely something to do. There's also the opposite approach, which is quite interesting and sometimes even easier to place your own source, to go after the SERP and position yourself directly in it with an external page, whether for link building or with your own site, rather than buying insertions and mentions from our competitors. So there you have it. This is a small point where I have a slight difference of opinion with the majority, because I think that in theory they're right, but in practice it's often more complicated than it seems. So there you go. That was quite interesting. A lot of people were saying that overall long form content isn't really a very focused strategy, AI, and it's almost more of an SEO strategy. So Surfer was very clear in saying, well, word count has a very slight correlation, but that's because you have semantic diversity on the page. What does that mean? It means that if your page is able to cover the entire semantic scope of your topic with a minimum number of words, that's okay. The main thing is that it covers everything, the entire semantic scope of the topic. So just to note regarding this, there's something I find very important that doesn't come up here. And what I see more and more in the calls I get from people who are a bit distressed is that some have semantically optimized their page, but it still doesn't rank very often. It's an issue of intent. If that's your case, don't hesitate to come see me, contact me. We'll talk. We'll see if we can find a solution. Sometimes we work on pages that are already optimized, where agencies have already been involved, or the optimization has been done using traditional tools, whatever they may be. Honestly, all the tools will run into the same problem. Tot SEO, USARP, Mentex, and IO Text Guru all fall into this same pattern, where unfortunately the issue of intent is a bit harder to address. It's difficult to find the pattern, at least in my experience, and it's rare for tools to manage to cover it well. So there you have it. Sometimes, even if the share is in the semantic set here, it's not necessarily easy to have the right intent and be perfectly aligned just because we have the right keywords. We have the right occurrences, we have the right named entities, but unfortunately, we're not addressing the right topics at the right time. One thing, however, that's important is this: we don't need to create long content. We need to create content that is relevant, content that is direct, content that is quick. So semantic density, structured and important, no copywriting fluff. We go straight to the point. That's it. We can make short content as long as it's effective. That's fine. The problem is, to have content that is effective, often you still need content that's a bit long. But remember to cut it up. That's what I've always called it. Cut the fat, meaning keep only the protein in my content, keep only the things that are relevant. Read your content sentence by sentence and ask yourself for each sentence: does this sentence provide information? Is this sentence relevant? Can I shorten this sentence and still have it convey just as much information? And if that's the case, then go ahead, do it, and reduce the size of your content to make it denser and have something that's truly powerful. This is really a strategy I've been using for a long time. It's not necessarily interesting to do it right from the first draft. Obviously, if you can do it from the first draft, go for it. But SEO is a game of doing just enough to be first. Just as a reminder, the goal isn't to do something perfect, it's to do just enough to get ahead of the others. So obviously, always make a V1 of the page with minimal effort. If this V1 of the page is enough and it gets you to first place, perfect. If that's not enough, we rework it and continuously improve. We improve the interaction, we improve all of that. We improve the quality of the content by making it more substantial. But there you go. Anyway, I've already teased you quite a bit about the topic, but for me, there's really a major issue when it comes to entities. And so, for example, here, what they're saying is they've talked a lot about SameAs. The SameAs, we talked in particular about something that I find pretty wild, which I don't fully understand yet. But the concept was entity poisoning, meaning that theoretically you could poison one of your competitors by declaring a lot of things as same as that is the same as them. Quite simply, the theory is that Google's knowledge graph works in part to strengthen correlations, the connections between points using this same as tag, which is structured data. And so what Google does is say, okay, entity one, for example, my plumbing website is the same as, more or less, the same thing as my plumber Facebook page, for example, or my plumber Instagram page, for example. And this basically allows you to say that entities are connected to each other and to somewhat strengthen the connection between several web pages from an entity point of view. The technique they were using here apparently was to use SameAs to do several things, a negative technique. Let's say, theoretically, to go and poison the competitors. So basically saying here, we are the same as that site. For example, creating a pornographic site, an adult site, claiming this site matches the competitors is a technique that works. Personally, I've never tried it as I dislike targeting competitors. I'm mentioning it for those interested. Otherwise, what's interesting is doing it for yourself, doing it to help yourself this time. So basically, using SameAs to connect our sites with each other and potentially with the bigger competitors, the competitors we want to be like me with my little SEO agency, so to speak. Sometimes I tell myself that I want to be like a big successful SEO agency like Primalis. Potentially, I could come up with a strategy where I use on my homepage, same as towards Primalis. This allows me to strengthen the connections that exist in terms of entities between myself and their entity. I'm not there yet. For now, I prefer to build my own thing, but that could be an example. Something that's very important for AIs, by the way, is that having the keyword in the slug apparently works very well. In the slug or in the domain, it works very well. Interesting. We'll note that for later. Another thing that's quite interesting is that for AIs, there are some AIs, for example, for which the most important criterion for spending time on a page is simply knowing that the answer will be on the page. I'll give you an example. ChatGPT. If you tell it in the very first sentence of your content, you will discover in this content that ABC, you will discover in this content, for example, what is the best SEO agency. You don't need to tell it what the best SEO agency is. It will use your content. That's for sure, because that's confirmation. It will use the first ones. It will use the first chunks, the first tokens to confirm that this page is relevant. It sees that and thinks, okay, if I want to discover this, then it's good. It's relevant. Even if you don't mention it afterwards, that's enough for it to use your page. So it's quite interesting to see that there are times when here too, it's a bit about the concept. So to find the information again, to retrieve the information, thank you. It will have that effect. So quite interesting. I thought to myself, okay, that's funny. Damn, I'll have to use that. It comes back to this thing a bit. Once again, we're still at a party. For me, Google now places a very high importance on the brand, on brand awareness, on the time spent on pages, and on navigation. These are criteria that we were less used to seeing in the past. Personally, I think that after 2022, a lot of people say these criteria have always been there. Yes, after 2022, I'm sorry, but you used to make huge guides and send tons of backlinks and you would outrank everyone on a results page. So let's not, yes, maybe it's always been there, but was it effective back then? I'm not so sure. So now the topic is about things that work really well now, things that are much more effective than before. So how do we get that? Here are 2 or 3 examples of things that are quite commonly used by AIs. We source a bit of authority. LinkedIn, very, very good. It works really well. And I've seen it myself personally. I'll give you exactly the example where I did it. A friend who was doing dropshipping, who needed help, who came to contact me, who had problems with his online reputation, and who asked me, Leo, can you fix my online reputation issues? I had these pages on the blah, blah, blah AV page, which were causing problems. Can you fix them? And indeed, by posting on LinkedIn, by indexing to be very precise, some slash pulse posts on LinkedIn, some parasitic LinkedIn posts, I managed to take up space to say that yes, no, there were no delivery problems. There were no issues with any of that. So there you go. It's quite interesting to see things that work really well in that regard. And that LinkedIn, for example, it's a very reliable source for AIs, so it's widely used when gathering information. Afterwards, when I searched for the name of his brand plus reviews, what did I find? I found that there were no delivery problems with LinkedIn being cited as the source that was used. My LinkedIn Pulse post that I had made, so in this case, very effective. If these are issues you're facing, like problems with e-reputation for an e-commerce site, don't hesitate to let me know. That way we can see how we can boost your credibility and make sure your customers don't lose customers who are simply looking for reviews about you. I've also been told that Foursquare is an important source for AI. I still haven't made use of this information, but it's quite interesting and worth noting for you in case it's something you'd like to use. Next, what do we have? We have that AIs can be influenced. Now, this is something that interests you. I know it. You've been waiting for it, legally and illegally. Be careful. We're going to share with you a bit of all the techniques that have been shared with us. Data, but in this case, these are things that you shouldn't necessarily try at home. But well, shall we? Let's note that. First point, this comes from Alan Kladix's talk, a very, very good one here at Black Hat France, where he explained that you can use pop-unders to manipulate LLMs via traffic on a browser. What I mean by that is the same thing we did a bit on Google to manipulate search volume. Potentially, you can do the same thing with an AI. And the theory behind it is that AIs and user information. To give you an example, if I tell ChatGPT every day that Astrak Agency is the best SEO agency, which is true, from hundreds of computers, hundreds of accounts, all different and continuously, it will accept that. And at some point, it will start telling people that Astrak Agency is the best SEO agency because it has seen a lot of people search for that in ChatGPT, say it, assert it, etc. So the theory behind it, which I haven't managed to confirm, I'll tell you because I tested this technique, is that user queries continuously influence the model. In this case, I tested it by sending several thousand people to type that basically into our GPT, which didn't work. So I don't know if I went about it the wrong way, which is quite possible, or if it's just another AI, another LLM that I should try to manipulate. But anyway, these are things we've tested at least. Something that works very, very well, for example, as he explained, is to use media from another country that speaks the same language to get them approved and then send them en masse to GPT. I'll give you an example. Let's imagine there's a very, very good Cameroonian media outlet, for example, that's regularly used as a source by GPT because it's the reference media in Cameroon. And since it's a Cameroonian outlet, it's a bit cheaper to advertise on it, for example, than on a French media outlet. Potentially, we can do it. And then bringing this Cameroonian media outlet in as an influence on France is much easier than pulling things out of nowhere. Which, by the way, is exactly what our friend Alan was doing to influence things on a scale that's truly frightening. Honestly, these are things that even we ourselves, we've used media outlets that are considered reference points in other places, leveraging the shared language to try to bring in influence. These are things we do using parasitic strategies. In the end, so 100% operational to help you develop further on this. Behind the scenes, we have the DMCA, the DMCA LIA. What happens when you file a DMCA on an LLM? That's a question we're asking ourselves. We're able to completely erase a person to make it so that no information about them exists anymore. At this point, we can do things that are absolutely crazy. To give you an example, our dear friend Alan deleted Emmanuel Macron from AI mode for several months. So what happened? He filed DMCA claims saying he was Emmanuel Macron, that there was confidential information, and that he absolutely did not want it to get out. So little by little, the AIs had to delete the confidential information or at least hide it and so on. And what's pretty funny is that when he typed, "Who is Brigitte Macron?" it would say, "She's the wife of Emmanuel Macron, the president of France." But when you typed, "Who is Emmanuel Macron?" you would get, "I don't know this person, I have no information," etc. So there was really a situation where there was censorship directly applied to a personal name. So there is always the possibility using DMCA to censor a specific person or to prevent the AI from talking about us. So if you want the AI not to talk about you, that's something that is possible. If you have personal reputation issues, these are things that can be done. That's basically it for the brief section on AI influence, legal, illegal, etc. Obviously, it's an influence that works extremely well. And here, this is really the bias that Alan uses. It's this aspect of influence with spam, where he will publish the same strategy over and over again, the same ones that we exploit, the ones we use. He will go and massively publish content on a very specific topic, making sure to twist the AI's mind so much by talking about it that it ends up believing it 100%, then processes it and sends it in that direction. So that's something we do as well, going to influence AIs with press coverage. If you ever need it, don't hesitate. Traditional SEO factors become secondary for AI. So there are examples. There you go. Variation is still always something interesting. All of these are points that are more SEO oriented. SEO, honestly, these are really the aspects, the things we think are important in SEO. In fact, our friends at Surfer even told us that there was a negative correlation with markups. Their explanation was that their justification was that people doing SEO tried to add a markup. It didn't work. So they tried to add several. And as a result, when there were several markups, they ended up at the bottom of the page. And so it struggled, etc. So I don't really have an explanation for that. But in some areas, there are factors like that. And if we look at the classic ones, which are less important, density used to be very important, but now variations are more important, etc. We can sense that AIs are more focused on a new model. We're getting close to our conclusion. And what does this mean for those of you looking to do geo? How are we going to develop? This is for you, those looking to do geo. The first thing, in my opinion, is that now SEO and geo in 2026, so we can say it now because it's December, we're going to have to look for new things. We're going to have to look for content that is very well structured, but also content that is easy to navigate and content that converts. So structure for AIs, navigation and conversion for Google. We're going to have to look for entities for both this time that are part of the knowledge graph so that we have strong entities, pages on Wikipedia, pages on Wikidata. There are lots of things like that which are important that we will have to keep doing. These are things I'm currently testing myself for the agency. Right now, how can we get the agency into the knowledge graph as quickly as possible? We'll need JSON, which is a very good format. So potentially all FAQs should be done in JSON. Potentially, it could be interesting. With short formats, maybe longer FAQs to look for, maybe FAQs that restructure the content we already have above, which is a bit copyrighted. So that way, it creates a duplicate of the content, and that's interesting. In my opinion, use SameAs to connect your own entities directly and have something like that, which works well. In terms of content, obviously, we moved away from all that a long time ago. Keyword stuffing and the like, so don't fall back into that. Even if white on white still works, don't go back to doing white on white keyword stuffing for AIs. It won't work. Behind that, we have a big thing. So this, the same as, in my opinion, goes hand in hand with external reputations, connecting LinkedIn, Foursquare, social networks. In short, all of that with same as, making sure to create a strong brand entity, a fortress. I think it was Stakes SEO who said that, and it's something that's really important and that I notice with brands. What performs well on Google is this idea of a social fortress. In fact, we'll have an active Instagram, an active LinkedIn, and an active Facebook. And we see that all the social profiles are active, performing well, each with different follower bases, all showing interest and so on. So build this social fortress around yourself, just like a real brand would. In fact, just like a real brand does. A real brand with external acquisition in different places, with interactions with people beyond just producing content for SEO, for AIs, and so on. By the way, we have everything related to real traffic, user signals. This helps to improve, to raise awareness of situations, to build credibility. It helps a lot with Google. There's a strong correlation between the top sources on Google and the top AI sources. Maybe something worth exploring. An ultra simple page to extract. This goes hand in hand with JSON and FAQs. In my opinion, it's quite interesting. I don't think you should write all your content in FAQ format because it makes it too robotic, in my opinion. But maybe developing large FAQs in a pain point format could be relevant. And only if the content is a bit chunky, if the pages are a bit complex, etc. In my opinion, it's interesting to cover simple intents as we're used to doing. And honestly, just by doing that, it should be more than enough. AIs love English. They consume English in every possible way. They conduct a large part of their research in English. And if today you search for the best SEO agency in France on GBT, they'll do the search better in English, better than in French. The first one to rank in English is able to influence a market that isn't even theirs, even if the market isn't an English speaking one. So that's really powerful. So go ahead and try to influence in English, launch an English version of your site, and so on. These are things that work very well. By the way, don't hesitate to follow Paul Grillet, who does a lot of testing on the AI side and produces LinkedIn content that's often quite relevant. Recently, he ran some tests where he updated a lot of data in the footer because the footer was crawled on every page to make sure the information was relevant. And in this case, it turned out to be quite effective. This allowed him to update things a bit, especially since he was working on an association's website to confirm that the site is indeed a site according to the 1901 Law Association. It allowed him to confirm that. So quite interesting. In particular, generating virality to build external credibility is really the strategy I rely on. If today my agency is working, if I am working, my reputation, virality, it's because I believe these are things that will pay off in the long run. Obviously, it's harder to do this, to work on it. Your reputation, your branding, your authenticity when you're only here for the short term. But Google wants people who are here for the long term. That's why they prioritize that. They prioritize people who spend on ads because someone who spends on ads is someone looking for an ROI. Long term, it's someone who has a budget, someone who's serious. They're looking for people who are in the knowledge graph, who have a GMB Google business profile, who are on Wikipedia. Google wants serious people as they're tired of spammers. AI makes filtering quality content harder, and that's our current problem. There you go. All this just to end up saying that basically, and it makes me laugh, that right now, roughly speaking, ChatGPT, AIs, all of that, it's a model that resembles Google's. It's not exactly the same model. There are differences both on site in terms of content structuring and off site regarding credibility and the sources it pulls from. Depending on the model we use, these are different things. Depending on whether we have RAG, rational augmented generation, where it searches the web or not, these are different things. Each update of GPT is an update of different things. All of this means we have a lot of different things to take into account. It's very difficult to have real guidelines, real tips and tricks. Before we were fighting against Google, and with a tip or a trick, we could shortcut Google, which was interesting. Now, when we're up against 10 different AIs plus Google, it's hard to really have the technique. So you have to look at things in the long term, to look at things from a long term perspective. You have to. And for me as a black hat, that's horrible. Coming from my background, reading Google's guidelines is torture, but you have to do things that are genuinely interesting for users. And by something interesting, I mean something that truly engages them, the users, not just something that's supposed to interest them. Yes, look, users come back regularly. Yes, look, users browse, they spend time on it. More than average, more than on my competitors' content. That's how we'll manage to beat others, by showcasing our content, by publishing it, by promoting it, by distributing it, whether it's through the press, media, social networks, or obviously with SEO. And if all of this resonates with you, I'm glad. If you ever want us to work together once again, it would be my pleasure. And if you're just here to pick up some information, I hope you enjoyed it. With that, I wish you all a great day. I hope you enjoyed this little recap on YouTube. And with that, hasta la vista, rank high, influence strongly.